Good morning.
Were you impressed, or do you have any response to what the acting governor, had to say in her closing moments? She did bring to your attention and to the attention of your government some of the human rights issues that she feels could be more stringently addressed.
Sure.
Could you comment on them?
Yeah. You know, the ministry is taking a look at a number of different aspects of the Human Rights Act. Clearly, in the throwing speech that you have in front of you, we're looking at age discrimination. You know, when I was appointed to the ministry, I spoke with my permanent secretary, and I said, you know, this is something that's been on my mind for quite a while, that we need to extend the protections against age discrimination in the workplace. Currently, as you know, age discrimination is protected in accommodations, facilities, goods, and services, but not in employment. And, you know, I'm getting older. A few more years, I'm going to be in that demographic. And 65 now is not 65 that it was, you know, 20 years ago. People are more healthy, taking care of their health. So I felt that it was a very important thing to look at. And the ministry has looked at it in the past, but it was kind of on the back burner. So I said to my permanent secretary, you know, let's revisit this. Let's put it on the front burner, and let's dust off the work that's been done and continue. Let's build on what's been done, because this is something that I personally want to see happen. And I think it's time that it should happen.
Aren't you getting some pressure from the business community on that?
Not at this point in time. You know, this is early days. We're going to do extensive public consultation on that. There was a public forum at the Bermuda College last week that I and my permanent secretary attended. It was very well put together, very well thought out, and we will be consulting with the business community, of course, because what's important and what we have to look at is that, yeah, it may be the right thing to do, but there's going to be ramifications, and we need to understand all of the ramifications, how it's going to affect the private sector, how it's going to affect the public sector. But I do believe if you look at countries around the world, most countries have done away with age discrimination in the workplace, so I think it's time that we take our rightful place in that area.
Sorry to come back to this, but may I just quote you what the acting governor said?
Sure.
I believe there is still scope for more sharing of best practice and ensuring a joint-up approach to complex societal issues such as child safeguarding, domestic violence. Bermuda is not alone in tackling these issues and does not need to reinvent the wheel.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
Totally.
I agree with that.
Jump in here.
Yeah, sure.
With respect to child safeguarding, I have met with the acting governor to discuss these issues. Recently, she served in capacity of governor of St. Helena, and recently there was a memorandum of understanding on child safeguarding signed by the Premier at the JMC, the Joint Ministerial Conference in London, between all of the overseas territories. So we're looking forward, and that is exactly looking at a more joined-up approach on how the overseas territories, in conjunction with the UK, address child safeguarding issues. So we are addressing these issues. She also mentions lower down the equal rights of men and women. We are approaching the issue of requesting the extension of the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women to Bermuda. That is under active discussion with Minister Richards' ministry at the moment, and I believe we've requested that extension, and we're now working through a matrix of what we would have to do in order to get it extended to Bermuda. So there are a number of issues there that we're in active discussions with the acting governor and taking positive steps, and more will come.
Yeah.
Morning, Ministers.
Good morning.
On the topic of human rights, some people in the LGBTQ community argue that not enough was mentioned about the issues, especially in terms of equal marital rights. Any intention on touching on that hot topic issue?
That wasn't in our throne speech. We're here today to discuss what's in the throne speech, so I'm not prepared to address that at this point in time, unless the AG has a comment to make.
I can address the you know, to the extent that there are ongoing court cases at the moment with respect to these matters. So obviously we will await the outcome of the court cases to see what action must be taken.
But you still have a bill before Parliament, don't you?
Well, the bill that we had, I think, has fallen off the order paper. So it's no longer on the order paper. And we don't want to interfere with the judicial process. So we're awaiting the outcome of the court case with respect to same-sex marriage at the moment.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Back to age discrimination.
Yes.
Do you intend to set a time limit as to when you can expect to extend those protections to those seniors?
Yeah, we're very early on in the process, as I stated earlier, so the public consultation has to occur. We're probably looking to bring legislation in the third, I guess sometime next year. But it's going to be a very active consultation process that has to occur, because there are wide-ranging ramifications of extending the protection for age discrimination in the workplace to seniors. So to answer your question, I can't put a firm timeline on it, but the work is started and will be ongoing. And like I said, it's part of my mandate as minister to have this be done. So we're very actively engaged in starting the process and continuing along with it.
Also, the charitable sector have struggled significantly since the recession, and they need money to carry on their social services. Do you intend to address that concern?
Yeah, well, that's something that we, as a government, we have to look at very, very carefully. We do understand that there are still many folks out there who are suffering. The economy is picking up. There are jobs being created, but there is a lag, and the government is very cognizant of that. So once again, as the Minister for Social Development and Sport, I got a lot of requests from various charitable organizations for funding. I meet with them, we discuss their needs, and then we do what we can to assist them. But it's a very difficult and challenging environment financially that we still are in.
Do you worry that social problems such as gang violence might exacerbate if they don't have the money to take care of those with problems? Yeah,
that is a real concern. I mean, as the minister, I'm very cognizant of the fact that there are social issues out there that need to be addressed. The government is tackling them with Team Street Safe and other initiatives that are out there. But as we all know, it takes money to fund these programs. The government is still, dealing with the financial issues that we inherited, and we do our best to fund whatever charities that we can.
Mr. Richards, the issue of racism has been brought up by Curb in the last few days. They want to know why, perhaps in view of what's been going on in the last year in our history, there wasn't more concern given to some areas in which that you could combat racism in Bermuda. There's no mention of it, and you say you don't want to talk about things you haven't mentioned, but surely that was quite a serious one.
Yeah, I mean, I actually saw something on the news last night dealing with that. The government we're going to take a look at that. That didn't make it onto our agenda for this throne speech. We're very cognizant that there are long, deep-seated issues in Bermuda in terms of racism, and we will look at that. It just didn't make it into this throne speech this year.
May I ask Mr. Moniz another thing?
Sure.
There are several things in here, so we probably wouldn't speak to because we're not as experienced as you, or that come under your portfolio. So if you can think of anything that's in here you want to talk about that we haven't spotted yet this morning. There is just one thing, it's the gaming bill. I've been given to understand that although this is an amendment, we have actually been told that you are dropping the original Singapore-style bill and starting fresh. Is that true?
Well, we don't view it that way. We are refining the legislation. It's largely come from requests by the Gaming Commission itself. So they had a certain view of the way in which the model should be set up. So there are refinements taking place. And we don't take the view that it's changing the model. If you look at the Singapore model was refined for Singapore but came from the U.S., and the present CEO of the Gaming Commission comes from the U.S. So all of these things originate in similar places, but there are refinements that will be seen shortly as they're tabled in the House.
Is it true there's an amendment inside that bill which will require any government minister who leaves the government not being able to get involved in the gaming business for 6 months? Is that true?
Well, I'm not at liberty at the moment to reveal what's in the bill, which will be tabled very shortly. So better to leave that to the minister who's directly responsible I don't want to get outside of my territory here. So, yeah, that's the Minister of Tourism's initiative.
Other things in here that you're...
Yeah, so obviously, we want to talk about the new Bribery Act, which is we're basing our Bribery Act on the UK model. The UK model is generally internationally viewed as the gold standard for bribery and corruption. In the UK, it was passed in 2010. So we're passing a Bribery Act which will allow us to request the extension to Bermuda on the OECD Convention against bribery of officials, and also UNCAC, the United Nations Convention against Corruption. So the Bribery Act will then place us to have these two conventions extended to Bermuda. We'll modernize our law on bribery. Then we're also modernizing our law on fraud, which will again put us in a better position. Bermuda in the coming year will be tested by the International Monetary Fund and CFAT of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force to see whether we're up to snuff in terms of our regulations on anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism legislation. So that will be put into place. So we have a number of initiatives here. Obviously, there's we're looking at the decriminalization of small amounts of cannabis, as many other places are. There are a number of other I think obviously, as Minister of Legal Affairs, I'm involved in a lot of other ministers when they're trying to, initiatives when they're trying to establish legislation.
The VATCA that you mentioned, it not only applies to public bodies and public institutions, it also applies to shopkeepers, people who are actually involved in the sale of jewelry and other issues. Land, real estate, and what have you.
Yes.
Are they fully briefed about the seriousness of what's...
Yes, there's been a lot of consultation, and we're just about to issue guidance notes for high-value dealers in terms of people who deal with, whether it be dealing with jewelry or cars or motorbikes or whatever. So it's gone down now to people who sell goods as opposed to people who are doing financial transactions, like banks or insurance companies. Another important initiative that we have is to deal with dormant bank accounts, and this is one area where Bermuda has been way behind the 8 ball. Other jurisdictions have a way of dealing with dormant bank accounts. So, what happens here is that if someone has a bank account which they forget about, or the person dies, or they become ill, or they get Alzheimer's, and a lot of people are in the habit of having a number of bank accounts at different banks, you often get them slipping through the net. So we've never had any provision in law in Bermuda for that, and we're going to make provision for that. In other jurisdictions, such as Jersey, they have a provision where that money is put into a separate fund. If the original owner can be found or comes back, they can give them their money back. But if they don't, the money can be used for government purposes, and in particular charitable purposes, speaking to the question that was asked earlier about that sector of the community, to enable more financing for charities. So we're looking to do that.
Morning, Minister.
Good morning.
In the front speech, where sides sobriety checks were discussed. Can you speak to the legislative side of that?
Yes, obviously, the two issues I'd like to speak to there. Let me address another one first. We are also looking at amendments to the Liquor Licensing Act, and these will allow a police officer of the rank of superintendent or above to shut down a licensed establishment in the interest of public safety. So there is presently a power within the Liquor Licensing Act which enables the police to shut down an establishment for up to 24 hours. I'm not aware of it ever being used, but we want to extend and enhance that ability in the interest of protecting public safety, perhaps up to as much as 72 hours. And there will, of course, be safeguards, so there would be a provision for an appeal to the magistrates court, to the liquor licensing authority, if anyone's unhappy about the shutting down of a licensed establishment. So we view that as important. The other matter you address in the throne speech it speaks of the decriminalization of cannabis, but it speaks of, obviously, in health terms, we're very concerned about young people getting involved with taking drugs, people under the age of 18 taking drugs. And obviously, we're concerned about that because we don't think it's good for their future, and we know that it's very bad for people's health. So at the same time, we're concerned about people driving under the influence of drugs. At the moment, the tests that are out there are really for alcohol, not for someone who's driving while they're stoned on marijuana or high on some other drug. And we want to address that. And other jurisdictions are using tests which can see if someone is driving under the influence of drugs.
Can you speak to the effects of marijuana? Where does government draw the line as far as the argument that there are certain treatments, medical treatments, associated with the drug?
Well, what happens, and again, this doesn't quite come under my ministry, but with respect to the constituent parts of the chemicals that come out of the marijuana plant, cannabis sativa, you have the CBD, which is what's meant to be helpful for people, and it's not what gets you high. So you really have to separate the two things. And you also have to have it in measurable amounts. So the idea, a lot of people think, well, I'll just get stoned and that will cure my cancer, or it will cure my asthma or whatever. Medical treatments don't really work like that. You need to be able to measure the strength of a medicine that's being given to someone. And you need to be able to separate out the constituent part that's going to help them. So with respect to the CBD in cannabis, there are drugs now that are able to measure the strength of it and use it for certain specific ailments. And so we have legalized, with license from the chief medical officer and the minister of health, the use of certain drugs. And that will be extended where we're able. There are more drugs coming online. But I wouldn't want people to get confused between using those medically helpful constituent parts of it and the parts that just get you high.
Minister, can you just speak to the initiative of the Mega Arts Festival in Barbados?
Yes. Cara Festa is a mega arts festival, multidisciplinary, multicultural, that occurs every 2 years. So the next Cara Festa is going to be in Barbados in 2017. Bermuda actually has participated in Cara Festa in the past. So it's going to be next year, and the government is actually going to fund a contingent from Bermuda to go to Barbados for the festival. I think it's important for local artists and also for Bermuda, because we have many Bermudians who are of Caribbean descent. Some of us can trace our lineage to Jamaica, St. Kitts, Nevis, different countries in the Caribbean. So this is a way for local artists and performers, craftsmen, to join up with like-minded artists, craftsmen, and in the Caribbean at this festival. And there's going to be a focus on cultural industries. So not just saying, hey, I'm an artist and I can paint or I can carve or I'm a spoken word performer. It'll be a way for artists to network with other artists in the region, to come up with ways to monetize their skills.
Could you give us a bit more on the National Cultural Heritage Policy?
Yes.
In depth.
Yeah. The Natural Cultural Heritage Policy has been a document that's actually been in the works for a number of years. Once again, we feel in the ministry, and I feel as the minister, that it's important for our culture to be put into a format whereas local artists can come together and work together to basically bring Bermudians together and to put more emphasis on culture. It's important that culture be given, in my view, a higher profile in the community. I believe that it's a way to bring Bermudians together, to celebrate our shared culture, to appreciate diversity. So this document is in the works, and it will be ready for presentation to the public shortly.
Can you just speak to the initiative of the group going to Barbados? How the government's going to decide who goes, and if people are interested in going, what's the process?
Yeah. I'm going to be honest, I'm not quite sure how that process is going to go. I believe that the cultural community in Bermuda will figure that out amongst themselves. I'm pretty sure there'll be a Gombe contingent and different artists that will go. But in terms of who's going to go, I can't speak to that.
Just one last question for Mr. Moniz, if that's okay. In regards to roadside sobriety checks, in other jurisdictions, they take a quite hard-line approach when it comes to being caught under the influence. There's a threat of losing one's job on top of losing your license. Does government intend to take a hard-line approach considering so many road traffic collisions occur because of drunk driving?
Well, that's more concern for employers. Obviously, employers want to know that their drivers are not stoned while they're on the job. So there are a lot of jobs where drivers are tested, and certainly we would encourage that, and certainly one of the largest employers of Bermuda, people who drive government vehicles and trucks, etc., is government. So we certainly would take a hard line on that.
And I believe there was another piece of legislation to do with underage drinking, that adults could be fined for.
Yes, that's fine.
Could you expand a little bit on that?
Well, that's the idea of social hosting, that if someone is giving drink to underage people, then there will be a penalty, and we want to heighten the awareness of that. We view that as very important, because what happens is people in a young age get into a culture of taking drugs or drinking at a very early age. The patterns are set, and you know, you'll see statistics to say that if young people don't start either taking drugs or drinking alcohol until a certain age, 21, they're very unlikely to have problems when they're older. So
Any
the
idea
problems,
what that penalty would be?
No, we haven't looked at it specifically yet. We don't have draft legislation yet.